Somewhere in a box of old ledgers sitting in the South Dakota State Historical Society, there is a handwritten record that rewrites everything you think you know about who kept American farms alive during the Great Depression. And the number at the center of it is 59%. That number is not an estimate. It is not a family story passed down through generations until it got a little bigger every time. It came from a woman who had studied accounting, who had worked in her father's dairy, and who sat down on the first day of every single month and recorded exactly what her farm operation earned and how. Her name was Gladys Gist, and in 1930, she was responsible for 59% of her farm's gross income. Here is what makes that genuinely hard to believe. The official census taken that same year had instructions telling enumerators that a woman who worked only part of the day on a garden, a dairy, or poultry should not be recorded as a farm worker at all. Gladys could have generated the majority of a farm's income and still not appeared in the data as someone who did agricultural work. That is not a small irony. That is the reason this story has been sitting in an archive for almost 100 years without most people knowing it existed. So let's go through exactly how she did it, because the method matters more than the number. And there is one piece of this that almost nobody talks about. Something that happened in 1933 and 1934 that proves the 59% was not a lucky year. I will get to that. But first, you need to understand what the farm looked like before Gladys built anything on it. In 1927, the house where Gladys and her husband Ray were living burned to the ground. They had no insurance. Everything went with it. The family moved into a house infested with bed bugs, and Gladys had to haul 3 barrels of water from a well across the road just to do the laundry. There was no safety net. There was no backup plan. There was just whatever she could build from scratch, on a piece of land they did not even own. Because here is the other thing the headline leaves out. Gladys and Ray spent almost their entire lives farming rented land. They briefly owned a small parcel, and they lost it during the Depression. The 59% belonged to the income of a farming operation that did not own its primary asset. That detail does not make the story smaller. It makes it bigger. She was creating financial stability without controlling the land underneath her. Now, the way most people think about farm wives in this era, if they think about it at all, is egg money. A few chickens in the yard, a little cash on the side, a supplement to the real income. That framing is almost perfectly wrong when it comes to Gladys. Her productive portfolio looked nothing like a side operation. She was producing and selling cream. She was producing and selling eggs. She was raising and selling poultry. She was processing milk. She was raising and selling turkeys. She was doing milking work. At certain points, the family was maintaining around 600 chickens. And on top of all of that, she was growing a garden whose output fed the family directly, which meant money that did not have to be spent on food. That last part is worth slowing down on, because it changes how the 59% actually works. Part of Gladys's contribution was cash coming in. Part of it was cash that never had to go out. In the accounting framework used for farm income at the time, food grown and consumed by the farm household counted toward gross income, because it represented real economic value the family would otherwise have had to purchase. So when Gladys grew vegetables that fed her family through winter, that was not just cooking. That was a financial strategy. She was not only generating revenue, she was plugging the holes where money would have otherwise leaked out. And here is where her story stops being just one woman's story and starts being a window into what was happening across the entire country. a federal report on national income covering the years 1929 to 1932 found that in 1929, roughly 76% of combined farm income came in as cash, and about 24% came in as goods kept for home consumption. By 1932, those numbers had nearly flipped. Cash had dropped to around 32% of farm income, and goods kept for home use had risen to roughly 68%. The quantity of goods farmers retained for their own consumption grew by approximately 40% between 1929 and 1932. Think about what that means. When the market collapsed and stopped converting farm production into cash, the families who had built strong domestic production pipelines were the ones who could still eat, still function, and still generate something that looked like income on a ledger. Gladys had not stumbled onto a clever trick. She had, without anyone calling it this, built exactly the kind of diversified, low-capital, high-frequency production system that was most resilient to the specific disaster that was coming. Now, I told you, there was something that happened in 1933 and 1934 that proves the point. Here it is. In 1933, grasshoppers destroyed the Gist family's wheat, oats, corn, and part of their cane crop. The following year, Gladys recorded in her ledger that drought and dust storms had killed the young grain before it could grow. The family's total income for 1934 came to $688.05. That is not a typo. $688 for the entire year. And even then, Gladys's contribution still represented approximately 47% of what the family brought in. The 59% in 1930 is what gets the attention. But the 47% in 1934, when the grasshoppers had already eaten one harvest and the dust had killed the next one, that is the proof that her system was not tied to good conditions. It was built to function when conditions were terrible. And she was not only running the production side of the operation. In 1930, the same year as those ledger numbers, Gladys earned more than $100 helping conduct the federal census. She was also boarding and feeding threshing crews during harvest season, essentially running a short-term boarding house out of her farm kitchen. She drove cattle to open range when feed ran short. She harvested corn by hand. Her actual asset was not the chickens or the cream, or even the garden. It was the ability to look at whatever resources were available, including her own time and knowledge, and convert them into economic value. Whatever the situation handed her, she found a way to make it produce something. Which brings me to something worth sitting with for a second. When the farmers' holiday strike broke out in 1932, sheriffs were advising truck operators to arm themselves just to get farm products to market. Pickets blockaded the roads into several Iowa cities and stopped trucks carrying farm produce to market. Eggs and cream were not domestic trivialities. They were liquid income streams so critical to farm survival that they became targets during an armed agricultural revolt. The people running those blockades understood something that the census instructions did not: that poultry and dairy income was real money, and in a cash-starved economy, it might be the only money a farm family had access to week to week. Gladys understood that before the revolt made it obvious. Now here is the part that I keep coming back to. The 1930 census, the one Gladys was actually helping to conduct, had official instructions telling enumerators not to count women doing garden, dairy, and poultry work as farm laborers if it was only part of their day. The work had to look like primary, full-time field labor to qualify. Everything else, the processing, the selling, the domestic production, was classified as incidental. It was not counted, which means a woman could be the economic engine of a farm operation and still not appear in any official record as someone who worked in agriculture. That is not a bureaucratic accident. That is a systematic failure to see a category of work that did not fit the definition being used to measure it. And it is why Gladys's story feels so surprising today. The tools used to record the economy were built in a way that erased exactly what she was doing. The only reason we know any of this is that Gladys kept her own records. She sat down on the first of every month with a ledger and wrote down what came in and what went out. Those books, covering 1928 through 1964, survived and ended up preserved in the South Dakota State Historical Society archive. History could see her because she made herself visible in a way the official systems refused to do. So, what does the full picture look like? Gladys Gist, on rented land, with no insurance after a house fire, in the middle of the Great Depression, built a productive portfolio of cream, eggs, poultry, turkeys, garden output, boarding income, and census work. She kept her own books. She diversified across multiple small renewable income streams with different rhythms and different buyers. While the farm's primary grain income was concentrated, seasonal, and exposed to prices, drought, and insects. When the grasshoppers came in 1933, and the dust came in 1934, and the total farm income collapsed to $688, her side of the operation was still producing close to half of what the family had. The lesson is not that she found a secret. The lesson is that the structure she built was fundamentally different from the structure that failed around her. Grain farming in the 1930s was a single concentrated bet on weather, prices, and pests, all of which went wrong simultaneously. What Gladys ran was the opposite. Small bets, frequent returns, multiple channels, low overhead. When one thing got hit, something else was still moving. And she did all of it while being officially invisible to the very census she was helping to conduct. If this kind of history is what you are into, there is a lot more of it on this channel. Stories that did not make it into the textbooks because the systems used to record them were not built to capture them. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And if this one surprised you, drop a comment with what part landed hardest. I read them. And honestly, the comment section on videos like this one tends to be where the best follow-up questions come from. Watch the next video, because the story sitting right after this one is just as strange and just as well documented. Gladys Gist kept her ledgers for 36 years. The least we can do is read them.